Get her out of my boardroom right now. Amanda Whitmore's voice sliced through the executive conference room with the confidence of someone who had never expected to be questioned. The conversation stopped so abruptly that even the quiet hum of the ceiling projector suddenly felt loud. 12 board members turned toward the woman standing near the polished walnut doors, dressed in a simple navy blazer, dark slacks, and comfortable black flats, carrying nothing more than a weathered leather portfolio that looked older than some of the junior executives seated around the table. She neither argued nor flinched. She simply looked across the room with calm, observant eyes, as though she had seen this moment unfold long before anyone else realized it had begun. Amanda folded her arms and forced a thin smile that barely concealed her irritation. This strategy meeting is restricted to executives and invited stakeholders. Security will escort you out. A pair of building security officers exchanged uncertain glances before taking slow steps toward the visitor. Around the long conference table, whispers began moving from chair to chair. Someone assumed the woman had wandered into the wrong floor. Someone else guessed she was an assistant who had mistaken the room number. No one bothered asking her name. No one asked why she looked completely unafraid. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, downtown Chicago shimmered beneath a clear spring sky. But inside Whitmore Technologies headquarters, the atmosphere tightened with every passing second. The company had reached the edge of a financial cliff. Months of declining revenue, failed product launches, and nervous shareholders had left the board with only one realistic path forward. An emergency investor meeting had been scheduled after weeks of confidential negotiations. If today's investors signed the agreement, thousands of jobs would survive. If the deal collapsed, analysts predicted the company could begin dismantling entire divisions before the end of the quarter. Yet only a handful of people knew the investor's identity, and confidentiality agreements kept that name locked away from nearly everyone in the building. Amanda believed she would recognize anyone capable of writing a check large enough to rescue her company. The woman standing quietly near the entrance did not resemble the image she had built in her mind. There were no designer labels, no entourage, no luxury watch flashing beneath tailored sleeves, no expensive briefcase announcing status before introductions could. Amanda saw ordinary clothes and calm silence, and she mistook both for insignificance. "I'm only going to ask once more," Amanda said, louder now so the entire room could hear. "Leave before you waste everyone's valuable time." The woman adjusted her grip on the leather portfolio without moving toward the exit. Her expression never changed. It was not defiance. It was patience. Across the table, Daniel Reeves, the company's chief financial officer, leaned toward Amanda and quietly asked whether they should verify the guest list first. Amanda dismissed the suggestion with a wave of her hand. "We don't need a guest list to recognize who belongs in this room," she replied. Several board members shifted uneasily, sensing something about the exchange felt wrong even if they could not explain why. Near the back wall, a young executive assistant named Emily Carter glanced down at the confidential meeting agenda on her tablet. Her eyes paused on a single name, then lifted slowly toward the composed woman by the door. Emily frowned, looked back at the screen, and then toward the woman again. Her heartbeat quickened as an uncomfortable realization began forming. But before she could speak, one of the security officers reached the visitor and politely said, "Ma'am, would you please come with us?" The woman finally smiled, not with amusement or satisfaction, but with the quiet certainty of someone watching the first domino begin to fall. The security officer stopped only a few feet away from the woman, waiting for the slightest sign of resistance that never came. She simply nodded once, not in surrender but in acknowledgement, as though they were only doing the job someone else had asked them to do. One officer spoke gently. "Ma'am, we really need you to step outside." She looked at him with quiet respect. "I understand that you are following instructions," she replied. "I have no issue with you." Her calm voice carried farther than Amanda's sharp commands had only moments earlier, and several people around the table found themselves looking away, suddenly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Amanda interpreted the silence as victory. "Good," she said while straightening a stack of financial reports. "Now we can focus on saving this company." Nobody noticed the faint smile that crossed the visitor's face before disappearing just as quickly. She slowly picked up her leather portfolio and walked toward the doorway without a single complaint. Every step echoed across the hardwood floor, each one seeming louder than the last. It was remarkable how a person could leave a room without saying another word, yet somehow make everyone inside feel as though something important had just walked away. Emily Carter stared at the agenda on her tablet again. The confidential document displayed only one highlighted line under today's emergency meeting. Strategic Investment Presentation. Presenter, Naomi Brooks. Emily's eyes widened. She looked toward the woman approaching the doorway and then back at the screen 3 separate times, hoping she had misread it. She had not. Her pulse quickened. Naomi Brooks, the founder of Brooks Capital Partners, the investor whose private equity firm had quietly built a reputation for rescuing struggling American companies without demanding impossible concessions. Emily had spent half the previous evening organizing confidential files for today's meeting. She remembered the instructions clearly. No photographs were to be distributed. No biography was to be printed. Only the name was included because confidentiality had been requested by the investor's office. Emily pushed back her chair so quickly that several people turned toward her. "Ms. Whitmore," she began carefully, "I think we should verify." Amanda interrupted before she could finish. "Emily, please sit down. We have more important things to discuss than someone's misunderstanding." Emily hesitated, her instincts telling her to keep speaking, but years of working inside executive offices had taught her how easily junior employees could disappear after challenging the wrong leader in the wrong moment. She lowered herself back into her chair, though her eyes never left Naomi. Daniel Reeves quietly opened the electronic meeting packet on his laptop. He searched for the investor profile, but found only a locked document requiring executive authorization. "Amanda," he whispered, "should we unlock the investment file before we continue?" Amanda barely looked up. "When the investor arrives, we will." Daniel glanced toward the doorway where Naomi had nearly reached the exit. Something did not fit. He could not explain why, but years of negotiating billion-dollar agreements had taught him that real confidence rarely announced itself with expensive clothing or loud introductions. Sometimes it arrived carrying an old leather portfolio and saying almost nothing at all. Naomi paused with one hand resting lightly on the conference room door. She looked back across the room one final time, calmly observing every face around the table as though committing each expression to memory. There was disappointment in her eyes, but not surprise. This was not the first boardroom where someone had decided who belonged before asking a single question. Long before she had built one of the nation's most respected investment firms, she had learned that assumptions often entered a room several minutes before respect did. She reached for the door handle just as a notification appeared on Emily Carter's tablet, and the subject line alone made the young assistant stop breathing for a moment. "Investor arrival confirmed. Naomi Brooks has entered the building." Emily Carter stood so quickly that the wheels of her chair rolled backward across the hardwood floor. Every head turned toward the youngest person in the room, but before she could finish reading the notification aloud, Amanda Whitmore lifted a hand. "Sit down, Emily. We are already behind schedule." Emily swallowed hard. "The building access system just confirmed that our investor has arrived." Amanda glanced at the conference room clock with visible impatience. "Then reception can bring them up when they get here." Emily looked from her tablet toward the closed door where Naomi Brooks had disappeared only seconds earlier. Her instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. She had spent 3 years coordinating confidential executive meetings, and one lesson had become impossible to ignore. Important people rarely introduce themselves by talking about their importance. They simply arrived. Daniel Reeves quietly leaned closer to Emily. "What exactly did the notification say?" Emily lowered her voice. "It confirmed the investor entered the building 8 minutes ago." Daniel frowned. 8 minutes. That meant the investor had arrived before Amanda ordered the woman removed from the room. His eyes slowly drifted toward the empty doorway, and for the first time uncertainty replaced confidence. Around the table, the board members resumed discussing emergency financing, but the conversation had lost its rhythm. Every proposal sounded smaller than the crisis facing the company. Cash reserves could sustain operations for barely another month. Several manufacturing contracts were already under review. Employees across 3 states had begun quietly worrying about layoffs, even though leadership insisted everything remained stable. Everyone in the room understood the truth. Today's investment meeting was not another opportunity. It was the last realistic chance to keep Whitmore Technologies independent. Amanda refused to acknowledge the tension. She walked confidently toward the large presentation screen and began reviewing quarterly projections. "Once our investor arrives," she announced, "they will see exactly why backing this company is the smartest decision they can make." Nobody answered. Daniel studied the numbers, but found himself thinking about the woman who had left without defending herself. He had negotiated enough acquisitions to recognize a pattern. People desperate for approval usually spoke the loudest. People holding real leverage almost never did. Meanwhile, just outside the executive conference room, Naomi Brooks walked through the quiet hallway without changing her pace. She did not stop at the elevators. She did not ask anyone for assistance. Instead, she entered a small executive lounge overlooking the Chicago skyline and calmly placed her weathered leather portfolio on a polished oak table. She removed her phone and read a single message waiting on the screen. Rachel Evans, her executive assistant, had already sent a brief update. "Legal team is standing by. Documents remain unsigned. Awaiting your instruction." Naomi typed only 3 words before locking the screen again. "Continue observing quietly." She slipped the phone back into her blazer pocket and looked through the glass wall toward the city below. 24 years earlier, she had entered another corporate office carrying nothing more than a folder filled with business plans. A receptionist had assumed she was applying for an administrative position before asking a single question. Later that same afternoon, a manager had complimented her confidence while explaining that clients expected someone who looked different to lead investment meetings. Naomi remembered leaving that building disappointed but determined. She never returned. Instead, she built the investment firm that now controlled billions of dollars in assets across the country. Back inside the boardroom, another notification appeared, this time on every executive tablet connected to the secure meeting network. The message contained only one sentence. "The investor has not missed the meeting. The meeting has missed the investor." Silence settled over the room as every pair of eyes slowly lifted from the glowing screens toward Amanda Whitmore, whose confident expression began to fade for the very first time that morning. No one spoke for several long seconds. The notification remained glowing on every screen like an accusation that nobody wanted to acknowledge. Amanda Whitmore looked from one board member to another before forcing a small laugh that sounded less convincing with each passing moment. "Someone is trying to be clever," she said. "Probably an assistant who sent the message to the wrong meeting." No one joined her laughter. Daniel Reeves slowly closed his laptop and folded his hands together. "Amanda, I think we need to verify exactly where our investor is before we continue." Amanda shook her head. "We are not going to stop an executive meeting because of one mysterious message." Emily Carter could no longer remain silent. With respect, the message came through the secure investor communication channel. "Only our legal department and the investor's office have access to that system." Amanda turned toward her with visible impatience. "Emily, I appreciate your attention to detail, but I am running this meeting." Emily lowered her eyes for a moment, yet the uneasy feeling inside her continued growing. She remembered every detail from the confidential preparation package. The investor had requested complete privacy before signing any documents. There would be no press conference, no photographers, and no ceremonial introductions. Only a private meeting with the board. At the time, Emily had wondered why someone with that level of financial influence preferred to remain almost invisible. Now the answer seemed painfully obvious. Across the table, another board member, Harold Benson, cleared his throat. He had spent more than 30 years serving on corporate boards and had survived enough crises to recognize when pride was becoming more dangerous than the problem itself. "Amanda," he said carefully, "would it hurt us to confirm the identity of the woman who was just asked to leave?" Amanda answered immediately, "Yes, because it rewards interruptions and wastes valuable time." Harold did not argue, but several directors exchanged uneasy glances. Confidence had begun transforming into stubbornness, and everyone in the room could feel the difference. Meanwhile, Naomi Brooks remained in the executive lounge overlooking the city. The room was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic several stories below. She opened her weathered leather portfolio and reviewed the investment proposal one final time. The document represented months of negotiations, financial analysis, and careful planning. Brooks Capital Partners had prepared to invest enough capital to stabilize Whitmore Technologies, preserve thousands of American jobs, and fund the company's next generation of research projects. Naomi believed businesses deserved second chances when leadership demonstrated wisdom, accountability, and respect. Money could repair damaged balance sheets. Character determined whether a company deserved to survive. Her phone vibrated once. Rachel Evans had sent another update. Legal team confirms documents remain unsigned. Board members are requesting clarification through secure channels. Naomi read the message without any visible emotion. She remembered advice her grandfather had given her decades earlier while teaching her how to build trust instead of simply earning profits. Never interrupt people while they are revealing who they truly are. Truth speaks best when nobody realizes they are giving it away. Naomi had carried those words through every negotiation of her career. They had protected her from making expensive mistakes about partnerships built on impressive presentations, but weak principles. Back inside the boardroom, another notification appeared, this time accompanied by the electronic signature of Brooks Capital Partners. Daniel opened it first. The message was remarkably brief. Respect is evaluated before contracts are executed. His eyes widened as he recognized the company logo beneath the signature. Harold Benson leaned forward to read the screen, then looked toward Amanda with growing concern. Emily quietly closed her tablet, already knowing the truth that the rest of the room was only beginning to understand. Somewhere just outside the conference room, the woman everyone had dismissed was calmly waiting, and the future of Whitmore Technologies was waiting with her. Daniel Reeves slowly pushed his chair away from the conference table and looked directly at Amanda Whitmore. Years of experience had taught him that numbers could reveal financial disasters long before people admitted them, and the numbers in front of him were no longer the most urgent problem. Leadership was. Amanda, he said with unusual firmness, we need to stop this meeting for 5 minutes. Amanda crossed her arms. Absolutely not. Daniel held up his tablet, displaying the message from Brooks Capital Partners. The investor is communicating with us directly. Amanda barely glanced at the screen before answering. Then they can wait until we are ready. Several members of the board exchanged stunned looks. Harold Benson leaned forward. That is not how partnerships work. Investors choose where they place their trust. We do not dictate the terms after asking them to save us. Amanda refused to back down. If this investor cannot understand a small misunderstanding, perhaps they are not the right partner for this company. The room became silent once again, but this time the silence felt heavier. Emily Carter lowered her gaze, realizing she was watching something much larger than an awkward meeting. She was watching a leader mistake authority for wisdom. Outside the boardroom, Naomi Brooks remained seated in the executive lounge with remarkable composure. She poured herself a glass of water from the conference refreshment station and looked through the investment proposal one final time. Every page represented months of work by analysts, attorneys, economists, and industry experts who genuinely believed Whitmore Technologies still had a future worth protecting. Naomi believed that successful investments were never built only on financial statements. They were built on the character of the people trusted to lead them. Her thoughts drifted briefly to another conference room more than 2 decades earlier. She had been a young entrepreneur carrying her first serious investment proposal, wearing an inexpensive business suit because it was all she could afford at the time. Before she had even introduced herself, someone had assumed she was delivering coffee for the meeting. Another executive had politely directed her toward an administrative office down the hall. She remembered smiling, thanking them for their time, and quietly leaving the building without correcting anyone. That experience had never made her bitter. It had made her patient. She promised herself that one day she would build a company powerful enough that respect would no longer depend on appearances, even if other people still allowed appearances to shape their judgment. Her phone vibrated again. Rachel Evans had sent another brief update. Legal team requests your decision. Documents remain ready for execution. Naomi looked at the message for several seconds before typing a single sentence. Wait until the board understands what happened. She placed the phone face down on the table and folded her hands calmly in front of her. Inside the boardroom, another secure notification reached every executive device simultaneously. This one included no financial projections, no legal language, and no negotiation points. It contained only a timestamp from the building access system confirming that Naomi Brooks had entered headquarters several minutes before the emergency meeting officially began, followed by visitor verification approved by corporate security. Daniel slowly closed his eyes. Emily felt her stomach tighten. Harold removed his reading glasses and sighed quietly. One by one, every member of the board realized the same undeniable truth. The woman Amanda had judged without asking her name had followed every instruction, every security procedure, and every professional expectation. The only failure had come from inside the boardroom itself. For the first time that morning, Amanda Whitmore found herself staring at the closed conference room door, wondering whether the opportunity she believed she controlled was already slipping beyond her reach. The conference room no longer sounded like the command center of a confident corporation. Instead, it felt like a room filled with people silently calculating the cost of a single decision. Amanda Whitmore remained standing at the head of the table, refusing to let uncertainty appear on her face, but the expressions around her had already begun to change. Daniel Reeves broke the silence first. "We cannot continue pretending this is a coincidence." Harold Benson nodded in agreement. "The access records, the secure messages, and the investor communication all point to the same conclusion." Amanda drew a slow breath. Even if that woman is connected to Brooks Capital Partners, she should have introduced herself. Daniel looked directly at her. She was given less than 30 seconds before security was instructed to escort her out. No one challenged his observation because everyone had witnessed it. Emily Carter quietly opened the digital meeting file once more and, this time, projected the confidential investor profile onto the large presentation screen. The page contained only a name, Naomi Brooks, and a short note requested by the investor's office. "Arrival will be discreet. Please avoid ceremonial introductions." The room fell silent again. Amanda stared at the screen, realizing that the meeting instructions had described exactly what had happened. The investor had arrived quietly. The company simply had not taken the time to recognize her. Down the hall, Naomi Brooks remained seated beside the tall windows of the executive lounge, watching afternoon sunlight reflect across the Chicago skyline. Her phone rang softly. Rachel Evans appeared on the screen. "The board is beginning to understand the situation," Rachel said. "Our attorneys are asking whether they should send the execution package." Naomi answered without hesitation. "Not yet." Rachel paused. "Would you like me to prepare a statement?" Naomi smiled gently. "There is no need for a statement while people are still discovering the truth for themselves." She ended the call and returned the phone to the table beside her portfolio. Years of experience had taught her that character revealed itself most clearly when people believed no one important was watching. The morning had already provided every answer she needed. Back inside the boardroom, another secure notification reached every executive device. This message came directly from the legal office representing Brooks Capital Partners. It informed the board that the investment agreement remained active but would not proceed until the investor determined whether Whitmore Technologies demonstrated the leadership standards required for a long-term partnership. No accusations appeared in the message. No emotional language. Only calm, professional wording that somehow carried even greater weight. Harold slowly removed his glasses. "This is no longer only about financing," he said quietly. "This is about whether we have earned their confidence." Several directors nodded. Daniel closed the financial presentation because the revenue charts suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the question now facing the board. Emily looked toward the conference room door, hoping Naomi might still be somewhere nearby. Amanda finally lowered her eyes, replaying every moment since the meeting had begun. She remembered dismissing the woman before asking her name, assuming authority without seeking understanding, believing appearance could tell her everything she needed to know. For the first time in years, certainty gave way to doubt. Then the conference room doors opened quietly. A member of the corporate legal department stepped inside, carrying a sealed envelope marked for the board of directors. "This has just been delivered by Brooks Capital Partners," he said. The investor requested that it be opened only after everyone in this room had enough time to reflect before reading the next page. The sealed envelope rested in the center of the conference table as though it weighed far more than a few sheets of paper. No one reached for it immediately. Every member of the board understood that whatever waited inside would shape the future of Whitmore Technologies. Harold Benson finally broke the silence. carefully opening the envelope and unfolding the first page. His eyes moved slowly across the document before he looked toward the rest of the room. "This is from Naomi Brooks," he said quietly. The room became completely still. Harold continued reading aloud. "The purpose of today's meeting was never only to evaluate financial risk. Every investment is also an investment in leadership, judgment, and organizational culture. Before committing capital, I believe it is necessary to understand how people are treated before their titles become known." Amanda felt the color leave her face. Daniel lowered his eyes without saying a word. Emily listened carefully, realizing every sentence explained what had unfolded over the past hour. Harold turned to the next page. Attached behind the letter was the unsigned investment agreement bearing the official seal of Brooks Capital Partners. The funding amount covered every shortfall identified during the previous months of negotiations, enough to stabilize operations, protect thousands of employees, and restore confidence among lenders and shareholders. It was the agreement every executive in the room had hoped would arrive. It had been sitting only a few yards away all morning. Before anyone could speak, the conference room door opened quietly. Naomi Brooks stepped inside carrying the same weathered leather portfolio she had held when she first entered the building. Nothing about her appearance had changed. The difference was not in her clothing. It was in the eyes now fixed upon her. Every person in the room stood instinctively, including several who had barely acknowledged her earlier. Naomi walked calmly to the opposite end of the table and placed her portfolio on the polished surface. She looked around the room, meeting every pair of eyes before speaking in the same composed voice she had used from the beginning. "Thank you for allowing me to return." No one interrupted. Amanda opened her mouth as though searching for an explanation, but no words came. Naomi continued, "I did not come here expecting special treatment. I expected the same professional courtesy that every guest deserves before assumptions are made." Her words were neither angry nor accusatory. Their quiet honesty carried more weight than raised voices ever could. Daniel nodded slowly. "You were never given that courtesy." Naomi acknowledged him with a slight smile. Leadership reveals itself in ordinary moments, not only during prepared presentations. She opened her portfolio and removed the original investment proposal. "Brooks Capital Partners spent 6 months evaluating your products, your financial recovery plan, and your market potential. Those numbers remain encouraging. This morning, however, I was evaluating something different." She let the words settle over the room before continuing. "Financial statements tell me whether a company can succeed. The way people are treated tells me whether it deserves to." Silence filled the boardroom once more. Amanda finally found her voice. "Ms. Brooks, I owe you an apology." Naomi looked at her calmly, but did not interrupt. Amanda continued with visible humility. "I judged you before I knew who you were. I assumed appearance could answer questions that only respect should have asked. That was my mistake." Naomi gave a small nod, accepting the sincerity without celebrating it. She glanced toward the unsigned agreement resting beside Harold Benson. "The decision before us has never been about whether I can save this company," she said softly. "The real question is whether this company is prepared to become the kind of place worthy of being saved." Naomi Brooks allowed the silence to settle before reaching for the unsigned investment agreement. She did not slide it across the table. She simply rested one hand on the document and looked around the room once more. "Capital can rebuild facilities, expand production, and restore confidence in the market," she said calmly. "It cannot repair a culture that refuses to examine itself." Every member of the board remained standing. The atmosphere had changed completely. Only an hour earlier they had believed they were evaluating an investor. Now they understood that they had been the ones under evaluation from the moment Naomi stepped through the conference room doors. Harold Benson slowly folded his hands together. "Ms. Brooks, I believe our board owes more than an apology. We owe this company responsible leadership." Several directors quietly voiced their agreement. Daniel Reeves looked toward Amanda Whitmore with genuine regret rather than hostility. "Amanda, none of us questioned the decision quickly enough. We all share responsibility for allowing assumptions to replace good judgment." Amanda lowered her eyes. For the first time since becoming chief executive officer, she recognized that authority did not guarantee trust. It had to be earned repeatedly, especially in moments when no one expected to be judged. She looked back at Naomi. "If there is any opportunity to correct what happened today, I am prepared to accept whatever accountability is appropriate. Naomi acknowledged her with a respectful nod. Accountability is meaningful only when it creates lasting change. Harold requested a brief executive session under the governance rules of the board. Naomi quietly stepped outside the conference room with Daniel and Emily while the directors remained inside. No. Raised voices could be heard through the closed doors. Only the quiet rhythm of thoughtful discussion filled the hallway. Emily finally found the courage to speak. Ms. Brooks, I am sorry I did not stop everything sooner. Naomi smiled warmly. You tried to speak when it mattered. Sometimes integrity begins with the willingness to stand even when no one is ready to listen. Emily would remember those words for the rest of her career. Nearly 20 minutes later, the conference room doors opened again. Harold invited Naomi back inside. The board members were standing once more, but this time with a visible sense of purpose. Harold spoke first. The board has completed a formal governance review. Effective immediately, Amanda Whitmore has submitted her resignation as Chief Executive Officer, and the board has accepted it. An interim leadership committee will oversee operations while a national search begins for new executive leadership. Amanda stood beside him with quiet dignity. She did not argue with the decision. She simply looked toward Naomi. I cannot change what happened this morning, but I hope this company can become better because of it. Naomi inclined her head respectfully. Growth always begins with honesty. Harold continued. The board has also voted unanimously to establish mandatory leadership and professional respect training for every executive, manager, and director. Guest reception procedures will be redesigned so that every visitor is welcomed with the same professionalism regardless of appearance, background, or assumptions. Naomi finally picked up the investment agreement and opened it to the signature page. Those commitments tell me far more than any quarterly earnings report ever could. She signed her name with steady confidence and handed the document to Harold. Around the room, a quiet sense of relief replaced the tension that had dominated the morning. The company had secured the investment it desperately needed, but everyone understood that the greatest victory was not financial. It was the decision to build a workplace where respect would no longer depend on titles, appearances, or first impressions, but on the simple recognition that every person deserved to be heard before they were judged. Several months later, the atmosphere inside Whitmore Technologies felt entirely different from the morning that had nearly changed its future forever. The reception area had been redesigned to welcome every visitor with the same professionalism, whether they arrived wearing an expensive tailored suit or carrying a worn leather portfolio. Every employee, from interns to senior executives, completed leadership training centered on respect, accountability, and the responsibility to question assumptions before making decisions. The changes were not symbolic. They became part of the company's culture, reflected in hiring practices, executive evaluations, and everyday interactions. Naomi Brooks never asked for her name to appear on the front of the building or for a conference room to be renamed in her honor. She believed lasting influence was measured by the standards people chose to uphold after the headlines disappeared. Brooks Capital Partners continued supporting Whitmore Technologies, not because the company had been perfect, but because its leaders had demonstrated the courage to confront failure honestly and build something better from it. The investment restored stability, preserved thousands of jobs across multiple states, and gave engineers the resources to complete projects that had once seemed impossible to finish. Daniel Reeves accepted a larger role in guiding the company's financial recovery, while the newly appointed chief executive officer repeatedly reminded managers that every meeting represented an opportunity to demonstrate the values they claimed to represent. Emily Carter's career also changed in ways she never expected. Her willingness to speak when others remained silent earned the respect of the board, and she was promoted into a leadership development position where she helped design new executive onboarding programs. Whenever new managers joined the company, Emily shared one lesson she had witnessed firsthand. The most important person in the room may not look the way you expect. Respect everyone before you know their title, because dignity should never depend on recognition. Amanda Whitmore quietly stepped away from public leadership and dedicated much of her time to executive coaching and governance education. She often spoke candidly about the mistake that ended her tenure, encouraging future leaders to understand that confidence without humility could become a dangerous combination. She never blamed anyone else for what happened. Instead, she accepted responsibility and used that experience to help others avoid repeating it. Naomi appreciated that choice because genuine accountability always carried more value than empty promises. One afternoon, nearly a year after the investment agreement had been signed, Naomi returned to the headquarters for a routine strategy meeting. As she entered the lobby, the receptionist greeted her warmly without recognizing who she was. "Welcome," the young employee said with a genuine smile. "How may I help you today?" Naomi smiled in return. "I have a meeting upstairs." The receptionist immediately offered assistance, confirmed her appointment professionally, and thanked her for visiting. The exchange lasted less than a minute, yet it told Naomi everything she needed to know. Respect had become a habit rather than a performance. As she walked toward the elevators, she glanced through the glass walls at employees collaborating across departments with quiet confidence. The greatest return on her investment had never been measured in dollars or quarterly reports. It had been measured in people choosing fairness over assumptions and character over appearances. Before stepping into the elevator, Naomi paused for a brief moment and reflected on the lesson that had guided her throughout her career. Leadership is never revealed by the authority to decide who belongs in the room. It is revealed by the wisdom to recognize the value of every person before their name, position, or reputation is ever known. That truth had saved a company, transformed its culture, and reminded everyone who witnessed that remarkable day that respect will always be the strongest foundation upon which any lasting success can be built.